So while Yvonne leads a class upstairs, kids with some homeschooled goodness and whatnot, I wanted to talk to people about how a team got schooled in the playoffs, that being the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I had planned on unveiling this jersey first and in the second round, or in the countdown of my jersey collection, but I decided, you know what, I'm gonna debut it now, and the lightning bolt is gray, so it may not show. It may look white. You may have wondered, is it gray? Yeah, it's gray. It's a weird jersey, and it's, depending on how you look at it, it's either kind of ugly or it's kind of nice. I haven't really made up my mind yet, and I have it, and the season that Tampa had is kind of ugly and kind of nice. The ending's ugly, right? They lose in four. And Columbus fans right now are rightfully saying, so we're not going to get credit. It's going to be Tampa choked. We're not going to get credit for knocking them out. Guarantee Tortorella doesn't care if he gets credit or he doesn't get credit. They're moving on to round two. He feels ecstatic. His job is secure for at least another full season. The interesting storyline to me is this. Tampa rolls through this season. They get 62 wins. And, I gave them a pass all the time. Power rankings. What did I keep saying? I kept saying they're so far ahead of everybody else that I couldn't justify dropping them to 2, even when they had kind of a crappy week. They had kind of a crappy week, but you know what? They won their games. So it's like they only showed up for a period. Well, they won this one, 5-4, 4-3. There was some shoddy defense in this, but they won it, so it doesn't really matter. And down the stretch, it looked like they should have won 64. They end up winning 62. We say, well, they tied history. What a great season. And eventually I can do a video on truly great seasons, a series that I'm doing on teams that had great regular seasons and didn't win the Stanley Cup. It's an interesting tale. So you look at the matchup they had in the first round with Columbus. Columbus being probably better than your standard number 2 wild card. To which Colorado fans are going to say, pardon? To which I'll say, point taken. I think we exist now in an era where there is a lot of parity, where team weaknesses are known by their opposition before the series even starts. And I think there were weaknesses with Tampa that we were kind of glossing over because you had Kucherov with 128 points. Vasilevsky had played fantastic the first 4 months of the season, so you can kind of sweep under the rug some of the mediocre games he had in the last couple months of the season. You can kind of sweep under the rug some mediocre showings they had, because you can say, well, yeah, they didn't look very good that night, but look how far they are ahead of the rest of the NHL. It really doesn't matter, which diminishes the losses or diminishes the results, even in wins that didn't look very good. And we had our blinders on. And I know Columbus fans are mad, like, nobody believed in us. No, we didn't. And I wasn't the only one. I didn't see a prediction outside of Columbus fans saying anything but Tampa in round 1. I saw some saying Tampa would lose in round 2, round 3, or round 4, but I didn't see anybody seeing them out in the first round. And that's not a criminal underestimation of Columbus, because Columbus going to the playoffs looked good, but Tampa seemed to have everything. And so now we're in this period where we're kind of picking over the bones. And this is why when I'm doing my, moving forward series, which today I did Chicago missing the playoffs and why, I like to wait. I don't want to do like an autopsy on Tampa until we've had a couple of weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks to really, think about it. So if I do a video a day, so there's 15 teams miss the playoffs altogether, and then you've got 8 teams that got knocked out in the first round, you get a little bit of a wait before you get to what happened with Tampa. I think it's simple. Tampa didn't play like the Lightning from the second period of Game 1 until the third period of Game 4. And there didn't seem to be any sense of we're in trouble from Coach Cooper until too late in the fourth game. And I don't know, it's two things, right? If they come back and they win 4 in a row, you can say, hey, Coach Cooper, he's got some really good, quiet confidence in his team. Good thing he didn't panic and he showed him he believed in him. But when they get swept, we can go, where's the emotion? What's going on? So it is an interesting storyline from that perspective. Um, and the team seemed to get fired up when they scored last night because the microphones on the ice were picking up some audio that some advertisers would probably wish they weren't. But I find that entertaining. I do. I find that entertaining. But you could tell, like, Tampa was trying to get fired up, and Columbus just wasn't having any of it. And even when the game got tied, there was no panic with Columbus. So it's easy to look at what happened with Tampa and diminish what happened for Columbus in their first ever series victory. So, to Columbus fans, I say this. This is the first series victory in the history of the franchise in 20 years of the franchise. So people can be forgiven for writing the team off before the series started up against a team that had won 62 games, went to the conference final last year, went to the Stanley Cup final in 2015. The interesting thing is this. We've been talking about cap hell and how it's hitting certain teams. Well, how does that hit Tampa going forward? Because with Tampa and with what happened, there's going to have to be some changes somewhere, right? Between 96 and 97, there were changes with the Detroit Red Wings that made them a better team, more geared towards the playoffs, and there seems to be the need for that with Tampa as well. And again, it's something I can totally get into at a later time, but what I want to talk about today is we've witnessed two storylines at the same time: the collapse of this team and the rise of a Columbus Blue Jackets team that looks like they're built for the playoffs. And the storyline that will continue into round two and potentially beyond is how many of these pieces in Columbus are going to be back next year. And not only that, but how much more likely are guys like Panarin, Bobrovsky, Duchesne, and others to say, hey, we've got something here, rather than go somewhere else to try to make an extra $500,000 or an extra $1 million a year. Why don't we just, commit to staying together, talk to Jarmo Kekalainen, and hey, we're going to make this thing work because this team can go somewhere and we might be able to win something. A playoff run can make a huge difference. It could be the difference between whether or not a team has to break everything up or, they decide they want to keep it together. I think there will be some overreaction. The one player personally that I have some concern with in the playoffs is Steven Stamkos. I'm telling you, he's going to wear this loss, and he deserves to, because this team has lost 6 straight playoff games dating back to last year against the Capitals. And, I'm not saying that Tampa's going to trade him, but will they make a difference in their leadership after this? Will they potentially look to change something in their top 6? It is troubling that guys like Kucherov, Point, and Stamkos were so invisible throughout this first round. And that as much as I was getting joked at for my preview, not mentioning Braden Point being in the top 6, by the end of it, the joke is he said Columbus was dead. And here we are. Columbus is very much alive, and it's Tampa that's done. The one remark I made last night in response to a comment somebody left on that video, as I said, you guys didn't let me finish. I said Columbus is dead, and then I was going to say tired from sweeping the Tampa Bay Lightning, but I didn't get a chance to say it. That, of course, is a lie. But it is a very interesting playoffs that we see, because these guys were supposed to win it. These guys were so far above everybody else, and now they're out. And the whole storyline, the whole plot line has changed. So now for Boston and Toronto fans, it's not just, well, if we get to round 2, we'll lose to Tampa anyways. Now it's become, oh, we got Columbus. We'll have home ice. That's totally different. That's a whole other matchup. It's sort of like for the Islanders are probably like, wow, we took out Pittsburgh. All right, this is we can do this. We swept the Penguins. We're not worried as much about the Capitals. And at the same time for the Capitals, they're probably saying, we're finally not going to play Pittsburgh in round 2. That's kind of nice. And yet, on some level, the Capitals would have to be thinking about how dangerous the Islanders are watch what happened to Pittsburgh and think, all right, if we're not ready for the Islanders, we could end up getting steamrolled there as well. We're in a league now where all 16 teams are kind of even. And this is why, like, predicting year to year how the regular season's going to turn out, predicting playoffs has become so perilous. Because over a regular season, you're going to have a 5 or 6 game losing streak in November that maybe costs you that playoff spot in April. You might have a 7 or 8 game winning streak in November that assures you you're going to have that playoff spot in April. Teams are very evenly matched. And then going into the playoffs, apparently all bets are off. And, trying to figure out where everybody's going to end up, I think it makes it more fun. I know people long for dynasty days. Some do anyways. The Islanders dynasty, the Oilers, and the Penguins having a couple of dynasties in here. But honestly, when it's totally different teams from year to year, I find that more interesting and more entertaining. I don't mind the divisional matchups. I don't mind seeing Boston and Toronto again as much as a Boston fan. It's frustrating on some level. Because Toronto fans for a couple weeks figured Shannon hates us, which is not true. And it apparently is going to feature San Jose and Vegas every year. But because of that familiarity, it does mean that you can see these upsets as well. Maybe Columbus, with that extra game they had against Tampa that they didn't have against a Washington or whoever else, maybe that makes the difference. We'll see how things go from here, whether or not we end up with a real story here or not. Maybe we end up with Washington and Vegas again in the finals, and maybe in June all of this other stuff has been replaced by, oh great, we got the same teams in the final again. Or maybe we end up with St. Louis and Columbus. Maybe we end up some mind-blowing Stanley Cup final that nobody would have predicted in October. I like that. I support it. Even though on some level seeing Tampa Bay go through and redeem themselves this year based on their recent results would have been nice. My biggest concern with Tampa, okay, if I'm a Tampa fan right now, is this. I have talked about in the great seasons, and especially with the Capitals of the 80s. You have these teams that have these really nice runs in the regular season. The Canucks, of course, went through that in the early 2010s, where President's Trophy, great teams. But in the end, the reputation is they couldn't win the big one. Tampa's flirting with that. And, is this going to be another one of those teams that we look and go, wow, they had great regular season success, some decent runs, but in the end, they just couldn't get it done. Is that what Tampa's fate is going to be, or is next year the year of redemption? Because as others have pointed out, after the 96 season with 62 wins, the Red Wings won like 39 the year after, but they won the Stanley Cup. They were much tougher, and they paced themselves. Something I pointed out about the Washington Capitals years back, the Washington Capitals winning another President's Trophy and flaming out, was the idea that maybe you're better off pacing yourself a little bit during the regular season, and I'm not sure how you do that without slumping. But there is something to be said for the idea that peaking at the right time. And sometimes I think the team that ends up finishing first has just been all out for 82 games. And then those last, usually with your President's Trophy winners, those last few games may not mean a whole lot. And I think that destroys your momentum going into the playoffs. I criticized down the stretch how some teams were resting guys going to the playoffs. I said, I don't really like this because I think it kind of hurts things. It'll be interesting to see if the teams that rested players in the last week and a half of the season are going to be the teams that end up being knocked out in the first round. That, I think, is an interesting storyline, and I have no problem going back and taking a look over the last week of the season and seeing if that actually ends up being the case. And again, does that diminish what Columbus did? No. Columbus played a fantastic series, and I think they're generally dangerous from here going forward. They went all in at the deadline. It had middling results in the beginning. They ended up charging to a playoff spot in the end. How far did they go? They end up going further than Tampa. And for Lightning fans, today is the most gutted you're going to feel. I say that as a fan of the Canucks, as a fan of the Stars, the Bruins. I've seen them all go to the Stanley Cup Finals and get beaten down. This is the worst day, okay, when you're expecting something big and then it all falls apart. This is the worst day. And then it starts feeling a little bit better. And then once you get around to the draft, it still feels pretty bad. But eventually it gets better. So there you go. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, especially about whether or not the Tampa Bay Lightning are going to end up looking at this season and saying that was the best we had, but we had a better shot at the Stanley Cup with a team that didn't necessarily finish first, like Washington last year. They didn't finish first in the league, but they were best when it mattered, and they won the Cup. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. And Stamkos. Is Stamkos on a slippery slope to maybe not being the captain? And then who do you name? So some interesting storylines, I think, still to be told with Tampa. I don't expect any major changes, but I think there'll be changes. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just tapping upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.